Oh,
It's doing
no.
all kinds of
You have a
things.
is it a laptop or what is it?
Yeah.
Uh, what's up,
Yeah.
man?
How you feeling?
I'm feeling great. I'm feeling outstanding. Good
You
to
look
get you.
good, man.
I try. I try.
Yeah.
Yeah, let me just start with there are two black men in my life who I look up to. One is my father, one is you.
Oh my gosh.
And we don't see each other a lot. I think I've talked about that, is that it's not about quantity, it's about quality. And it's been what, like 3-4 years since we met, since we've seen
Yeah.
each other. It's
I
been
think you're right. Yeah.
up at your house.
Exactly. Which
and surprised you. um, so we met in 1984.
yes, we did. Was the summer of '84 or the spring? Spring.
It was the spring of '84.
Yeah,
AAU team.
that's exactly right.
And he shut us down because no one was showing up. Which you always got to respect Reggie Kitchen, because he was like, "No, I'm not having this." And then we were on the same summer league team.
That's right.
In the summer of '85. And then
that was summer of '85.
Yeah, summer of '85. Oh no, summer of '80. Yeah, '86 actually. After our freshman year, we were in the
freshman year. That's right. Kenner League.
Yeah. And then you and I pedaled across the country together, which many people are like, "What do you mean?" We pedaled across the country together, and we had so much fun. And as I have mentioned to you, that we would travel 20, 30 miles, and we wouldn't say a word.
No,
and then the game became, can I make this dude laugh? So the wedding, I want to talk about the wedding first. One of the most beautiful happenings ever was when you married Shannon. And it was one of those things where there were two different worlds colliding, and there was just so much love. Right? I mean, it was crazy. There weren't cliques. It was just like there was just so much love from Maine and from Jamaica. Right?
And points in between.
Yeah. That was like the most beautiful 7 or 8 days of my life.
I just love hearing you say that. It brings back such fond memories and deep stomachache laughter.
Right, exactly.
And,
so,
but to your point about the intersection of different folks who were all connected one way or another, but became family during that stretch of days, and it was incredible. And you were such a key part.
Well, one of the things that I get a lot of compliments, and I get a lot of people give me a lot of love, but I always say, but you haven't met Neil yet. And one of the things that really hit home with me, kind of explains you, is what at the wedding, when your dad was talking about the post office. Do you remember that? When he was, and it was like, this is such Neil, because he just breaks things down to you that you just understand. And tell that story about what your dad said about the post office.
Well, my dad and I, we had just such a wonderfully close relationship, and we were really good friends. And I think the central feature of our relationship was just how casual things were between us. And we'd have these really easy, free-flowing conversations. And, one day my dad had he had this stack of letters that he was getting ready to mail. And a couple of them were to Jamaica. And so, we had to go to the counter, and the teller is ringing up the stamps and the cost for postage, and some of them way different and all that. And, you know,
Oh yeah, because they just raised the price of stamps, right?
they just raised the price of stamps. And so, you know, after that whole counter process takes place, you know, my dad's out, maybe he's out like $22 or something like that for his whole sort of, you know, his mailing excursion. And on the way back to the car, you know, he's like, my gosh, I can't believe how expensive these have gotten. You know, just a few days ago, it would have cost this and that. And, you know, he's kind of riled up about that 22 or whatever it was.
Right.
And so we got in the car and, you know, a few seconds, maybe even a minute had passed. And finally I said to my dad, I said, you know, yeah, I hear you, Dad, but isn't it incredible that you can just stick like a square-inch piece of paper on an envelope and somehow it's going to arrive
Somewhere,
anywhere in
anywhere.
the world that you told these kind people to take it?
Exactly.
You know, I said, it seems to me that $22 is kind of a ridiculous bargain. Kind of a service.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
And so we had a similar conversation a few weeks later when, you know, I'm really close to my aunt in Jamaica, and you know, we talk on the phone a lot. And
Aunt Bunny.
Aunt Bunny. And so I had rung up a nice little bill from reaching out to her and having her talk. And having our talks, and you know, the same thing came up, and my dad was like, "Geez, these really costs a lot to talk on the phone," you know. And I was like, "Think about it."
Right. Exactly.
You know, somebody picks up a machine on one end, you pick it up on the other, and seems like a bargain.
All right, so you always have the words, and one of the things that I remember is that when you were doing the interview with Norm Lear, and you said something that I felt, but I just never had the words. And you said you were scared. And for you and I, who grew up privileged, I have never felt more aware of my blackness, and I've never been more scared of my blackness than I have in the last 4 years. And you said something like that to Norm, right?
Yeah, I did. And I didn't plan to, Brian. You know, he and I, we had met the day before for, you know, maybe 2 minutes. Just someone had introduced us, knowing we were going to be on stage together the next day. But our time on stage was really the beginning of our relationship, and we connected to such a depth and to such an authentic level during the conversation we were having on stage that clearly I felt comfortable opening up to him in a way that was very atypical for me. And while I was on stage with him, the audience didn't exist, frankly. I mean, it really was just me and a man who had accomplished so much in the area of sort of revealing race issues, race topics, race sensibilities through his artistry in ways that so many of us were able to access over the years. There was something comfortable about that scenario that enabled me to share with him. And this was on the heels of, you know, Trayvon Martin and my gosh, it was.
There was someone you brought up.
Jonathan, yeah, it was Charlotte, North Carolina. There were a flurry of tragedies around unarmed black men being killed. And that's the context in which it came up. I said, you know, with this landscape and this atmosphere, I feel fear in a way that I never have before. And to your point, you know, I always reflect back on how fortunate I was in terms of, you know, middle-class upbringing and always around people who really cared about me. You know, feeling safe was something that I had been gifted for my whole life until those recent weeks.
Right. I talked to my father about this because, I was 50 years old before I realized that he snuck into this all white neighborhood to give me access. And I was just curious about Ann and Percy giving you access and making and getting you to Landon Prep. Like, what? Tell me about that. I mean,
yeah, my parents. You touched on this. We're a Jamaican family. My parents decided that as much as they loved Jamaica, they fell hook, line, and sinker for the American dream, and wanted to live in a place of opportunity. My father did not come from a wealthy background, and he had ambitions that he didn't think he was going to be able to pursue or secure or satisfy in Jamaica because of his impoverished upbringing. And so America was the place, the land of dreams, and they came here and raised us, my two sisters and me, in a way that really made us feel confident that wherever we were, we belonged. They didn't spend a lot of time talking about race issues in our home. They spent a whole lot of time talking about how you treat people.
right. Right.
And that had no racial boundary. It had no gender boundary. It had no socioeconomic boundary. It was just be good to people. And more than say it, they modeled it. They were and are my mother. I lost my father a couple of months ago, but my mother, they're just very kind-hearted people, and they treat people well, and they treat people with dignity and respect. And that was the dominant theme in our home. So their interest in providing for their kids really led them to say, look, we want to find the best school opportunities for you and for your sisters, and we think this is the one. And that led me from a public school in my area, which I was having, I'm doing okay. But I clearly was a kid at that age who I would coast. And, if I could accomplish something with minimal effort, I would do it.
Right.
And they were interested in getting me an environment where I started to feel more intrinsic motivation to push myself, even if it wasn't called for. And that's how I landed on such a wonderful schooling opportunity where, in addition to the incredible academic preparation that I enjoyed, more importantly, I just had a lot of people around me who cared in ways that made me feel like, it was more than a school. It was a support network, and it was a family, and it was people who were going to hold me accountable and demand the best of me. And that's
I just know that when you brought me into your world of Landon and all your friends from high school and everything who were white, I just always saw them as allies. I mean, Ted Evers, Tom Scott, all those guys, they just reeked of, I love you for you, right?
Yeah. Well put.
Yeah. So I've actually had to change some of my, because I used to be a big runner at night. I used to love running at these weird hours. And you won't do that anymore, right?
No, I don't. And I've shared that, in the opening of one of the talks that I've given in recent years, that I don't do it anymore. And I have had in my life just a number of encounters that certainly felt threatening to me and, were perceived as threatening to, someone taking out the garbage at night, or the community security car that
Right.
is giving me like a marathon type escort out of the neighborhood, and I just it's back to the fear. So many of these tragedies that we have endured just in recent years, right? And sadly, this is not a new a new fad. I mean, you go back to Scott LaRock and KRS and, you know, some of the early classics of hip hop, and they talk about, you know, treatment by the police and, you know, you name it. And it's all that we're seeing again now. I have been so stunned, as so many of us have, as to how a seemingly innocuous situation at the start turns into, minutes later, the loss of a life. And that, I mean, my God, Rashard Brooks, you look at that videotape and you say, now, wait a second, the engagement that he's having with the police officers, there's going to be some tension here, but if someone would tell you that what I'm looking at now, 30 minutes later,
going to lead to a death,
you'd say, what are you talking about, right?
Right.
And so that, these tragedies have caused me to realize how quickly things can turn, how quickly misunderstandings can happen, and what can happen when you are not afforded the benefit of the doubt as a human being for an armed law enforcement officer, or for an armed someone who thinks they are a law enforcement officer.
Right.
And the idea that, oh, I'm just running in my neighborhood, you know, what's the worst that can happen? Unfortunately, you know, and I know many people, many men, Black men across the country have felt that they have to abandon some of those rights, some of that benefit of the doubt that you think you'll get as a human being.
Right. So you were running in your neighborhood at night? And
yeah, I was running in my neighborhood, and it was, I don't know, 10:30 probably, after a long day of work, but wanted to get the workout in, right? And
right, yeah, you gotta get that burn in. Yep.
And wife's about to fall asleep, and here's a shot to go get a half hour in. And to be clear, I wasn't running, I was jogging, and I turned a corner up, again, a really quiet street, really quiet neighborhood, nothing going on. But I saw up ahead, I saw a figure, turned out to be a man, but I saw him wheeling his garbage bin and recycling bin out to the end of his driveway. I'm sure the collection was coming in the morning. And, you know, as I approached him, he had dropped off the bins and was starting to walk back, but then looked at me and then started to run up his driveway. And, you know, at first I'm looking behind me because I said, if he's running, maybe I should be running.
Right. Yeah. Right.
And then I abandoned any thought that he was running because I inspired him. And then it dawned on me why he was running, right? He wasn't expecting to see the image of me in what he thought was his neighborhood. He didn't realize it was our neighborhood. And it unsettled him to the point where he fled. And, you know, I'm shaking my head as I run by. I just not going to make anything of it. But I do pick up the pace, right? Because last thing I want is for him to go in, get on the phone to the security guy. So I pick up the pace. And I'm thinking, you know, what if this had gone differently, right? What if I had given in to my righteousness at the time and said something to him, you know, and, you know, and not only said something to him, maybe I take a step or two on his driveway, kind of not even realizing it, right? And he gets to his garage, his open garage, and he kind of reaches around, you know, the corner, and next thing I know, he's armed, and I'm on his driveway a couple feet, and he's got some stand your ground protection, and there it is, right? And you know, I've always wanted to think that I'm being much too dramatic and far-fetched about the what if, but then I realize I'm not.
No, and that's, you know, like when I tell my friends, my white friends, when I ask them, have you ever been stopped for doing nothing? And they can't even wrap their head around the question.
Exactly.
And I say, I don't know. I don't have any black male in my family or friends who are older than 18 who have not been stopped several times.
No,
Um,
it's just, it's rampant. And the other thing that is really telling, we've become so accustomed to it. And look, I'm going to tell you again, as if, you know, we're keeping score. Like, I have fared better than most black men
no, yeah.
across the country
Again, we
in terms
we
of,
are both very privileged. We have,
exactly.
yeah,
And so while I've had my challenges and run-ins and disappointments and all of that, I know that there are black men out there who have had these things to a much more
right,
significant degree,
right,
in number and in threat, right? And
right, yeah,
you know, while in some ways that's not significant, it's like, is this a contest we're trying to win? In other ways it is, because my perspective, if it's this deeply discouraging and dehumanizing for me, right?
right.
I know what it's like for folks who have not had it as well as
Yeah.
I've had it. You
Yeah,
know?
because I think our friends who are white are shocked that we've had the same experiences as any other black man.
Right.
But that's been actually one of the good things that has happened in the last, 6 weeks, is that we're having these open conversations about things. And I think, and this is why really wanted you on, is, like access and education. So you started the Visible Men School. Tell me about why you started it and what it's about.
Yeah. So Visible Men Academy, we started it, a team of co-founders and I, including Shannon, my wife. We started this, we just finished our 7th school year, and it's an all-boys charter school in Bradenton, Florida. We live in Sarasota, but Bradenton's a neighboring town, and that's where our school is housed. And we started VMA because we got to a place where we could no longer accept the shockingly substandard school and life outcomes for boys from low-income families. Most of them boys of color, and most of them black boys. But when you look statistically across the country at school and life outcomes for this particular demographic, you see gross overrepresentation in all of the negative school and life outcome statistics, and equally gross underrepresentation in those same areas. There is, and has been for decades, really, really tragic low performance that leads to what I refer to as the cycle of futility, right? So we see
like mass incarceration.
Well, I tell you, you see that right now we're at a historic high, or at least approaching it, in terms of percentage of black boys who graduate from high school, and that's still less than 50%, right? So you see 2 black boys walking down the street, one of them is going to graduate from high school. And again, that's a historic high. In some of our areas across the country, it's significantly lower than 50% high school graduation rate. You see that, but what you don't account for is that, you know, the graduate or the dropout happens, you know, junior, senior year, but the psychological dropout happens in our age group, you know, in 1st, 2nd grade. Right. Boys make a very quick determination because they're behind in reading and math proficiency. They are struggling with their grades. They find themselves having behavioral transgressions, a lot of visits to the principal's office, interventions such as detentions and suspensions and expulsions. Boys make the decision very, very early that school is not for them. And they'll stick around for another few years because they have to, but the psychological dropout happens early, and that leads to not graduating from high school. You don't graduate from high school, it's harder to get a job. So here's unemployment. If you're unemployed, what do? You find ways to make money, and here comes crime. You commit crimes, here comes incarceration. Once you're incarcerated, the likelihood of recidivism takes over. These are very measurable. What's less measurable, but no less impactful, are the negative impacts on the community and the nuclear family
Right.
that we see the ramifications and consequences of in so many different ways. Our school exists to tell a very different story about Black boys and men of color, boys and men who come from low-income family backgrounds. We have a nation full of examples that these challenges can be overcome. And not just that they can be overcome, but actually the character traits and virtues that one develops by dealing with the circumstances of poverty are actually the traits that we describe and laud in our leaders. Talk about toughness, talk about creativity, resilience, right? Challenging experiences forge these kinds of virtues in individuals. And what we are sure to do is, while we look at our young boys at our school who are going through these difficulties that poverty heaps on families and communities, we say, yeah, we wish they didn't have to endure that. What we do know is we can look at the traits that these circumstances are developing in them as assets. And if we look at them as assets rather than as deficits, it changes how you see the whole picture. And it causes you to create school environments that celebrate their strengths rather than harp on and penalizes their weaknesses. That's what we're all about at VMA.
Yeah. So now you're trying to spread the word. You're trying to grow. Tell me about that.
Yeah. So we've always had commitments. When we started the school, we had two commitments, and the first was local school, and the second was national impact. We are a school in Bradenton, Florida, currently right around 100 boys. We want to build a new school building that will enable us to get up above 200 boys, but relatively speaking, that's a small school. We know that, and we want our attention to be on creating the best school we can create to serve the students and families in the community that we serve. And we know that this crisis exists far beyond Bradenton, Florida. And so we feel what is a healthy obligation to ensure that the discoveries we're coming across about how to serve these boys best and how to affect better, more sustainable results, we feel obligated to share that discovery and those learning so that other agencies, schools, administrators, educators, politicians, philanthropists can benefit from what we've learned, and so that we can learn from them. So we are now embarking on what this national impact piece can look like. And it's a couple of ways. One, we want our new schoolhouse to not just be where our boys come to school. We also want it to be a professional development center where we can invite and attract folks from all across the country who are committed to this realm, this service area, and exchange ideas about what works best. And the other thing we're trying to do, we've launched what we refer to as the Visible Men Impact Network. And we are entirely convinced that the story of Black male success is untold. We harp so much on the strife and the struggle, and we need to talk about those challenges, right? I spent time talking about that cycle of futility. It needs attention. And we have an asset that we're not using, which are the stories of men who are doing wonderful things in their community, great family men, wonderful professionals, none of us perfect, but stories and experiences that can really benefit our young boys.
Right. Even the Visible Men name comes from a book. You didn't even talk about that.
Yeah, well, of course, I was inspired by, Ralph Ellison is one of the greatest literary works in our history, Invisible Man, over 580 plus pages. The protagonist struggles through discrimination, segregation in the South, also in New York City, but he goes the whole 580 plus pages without a name. You literally never learn his name, which is the epitome of invisibility. And Visible Men stands for just the opposite, see and be seen. And so our network will collect stories of these wonderful visible men across the country, share these stories. And also the thing we're really excited about is that we in amassing this content from the stories of these visible men, we've learned a lot about curriculum over the years from running a school. So we want to shape that content into character curriculum that we'll be delivering to boys in schools, after school programs, boys and girls clubs, YMCAs, faith-based.
Right. What grades do you have?
Well, right now our school is kindergarten through 5th grade. We've actually just aged down. We've added a program for pre-K, which we're excited about because we know how important the early education is.
Right.
And
Get
so
them,
much
get them
literature.
young, yeah.
Oh, absolutely. But our curriculum will start at that level, the elementary age level, but we're going to age it up so that we can serve middle school age boys and high school age boys as well with age appropriate content as they embark on their journeys toward their goals and ambitions and aspirations. You know, I remember reading, I believe it was Dreams from My Father, President Obama's book.
Yeah.
And he had befriended another social activist, and this woman had a son. And when Barack Obama first met this son as a young boy, he said to the boy, so what do you want to be when you grow up? And the little boy, really bright-eyed and excited, responded that he wanted to be an Air Force pilot. And Barack Obama said, that's great. Oh, those are the coolest guys in the world. That's awesome. And they got really excited about his aspiration. Well, years went by and he saw this boy again, who was now a young man, who wasn't so bright-eyed, who was more despondent, who was less communicative. And he said, hey, you still want to be an Air Force pilot? And the young man looked at him kind of like, what are you talking about? You know, nobody looks like me, that comes from where I come from, is an Air Force pilot, right? Like, you know, I was a naive kid when I wanted that to be that, but now I know the world and I know there's no chance I'll be that, right? The best thing I can say about what Visible Men Network will do, it will equip that young man to see and access the stories of the Black Air Force pilots that have come before him, so that he can attach his identity to that of theirs and realize that of course he can be an Air Force pilot.
Right. So you have visible Black men directly interacting with these young boys, correct?
Exactly. And when you say directly, you know, the definition of directly has changed because of the proliferation of technology. So, you know, what we're excited about is connecting the graphic designer in Seattle with a boy in Houston who loves to draw and feels like, I didn't even really know what graphic design was, but there's somebody who looks like me, came from a single parent home, who, you know, loves to draw. And, you know, all of a sudden that young boy is directly connected to someone who can inspire him through all of the resources that we have at our fingertips to make that connection happen. Right.
So if people want to help or donate, they go to visiblemen.org. Is that?
Yeah. So visiblemen.org is a landing page that frankly doesn't exist yet. It will in about 2 weeks.
Okay.
So what I would ask them to do is email me, Neil, N-E-I-L, @visiblemen.org, expressing their interest, and we'll keep them in the loop. And once we launch our landing page, it'll give them a home base to express that interest, and that's not too far down the road.
Well, again, you are a beautiful soul, and I'm glad to have you in my life. And I think what you're doing, because I think education is the key to all this. If you can teach these kids and have them have access, it's a wonder of the world. So thank you for your time, man. I appreciate you. Love you.
I love you too. Thank you so much for providing this opportunity to share this. It means a lot.
And please tell Shasha and Reese and Blair I said hello. Uncle B.A.
We will. You've earned lifetime legend status in our home for showing up on Blair's birthday.
Yes.
They thought you lived around the corner when I had to let them know.
This clown does not live anywhere close to.
Hey man, you're wonderful. Thank you so much,
man. All right. Thank you.